5 years. And before that, I taught in Toronto for over a decade. So if I say anything strange, just let me know, because sometimes I can use the wrong nouns, I've found. So just pop any questions you have into the comments section. The title of our webinar today is Sowing the Seeds of SEL. We're going to look at employing practices based on evidence in the classroom and online. And this is an introduction to the EEF guidance report on improving social and emotional learning in primary schools. I know that there are a lot of you here from a range of roles. We have teacher trainees, TAs, heads, governors, and people working outside of schools. So I really hope that this is useful for all of us, especially at this time. I think that a lot of us are realizing the importance of SEL in school as we've been in lockdown and as we're starting to return. Sorry, just waiting for this to load up here. Here we go. So an overview of what we're going to do today. Here we go. We're going to start with defining what SEL is. We'll look at why we should teach it and what the positive outcomes are. We're going to look at what the EEF recommends in its guidance report and look at some just practical strategies that teachers could use to embed SEL into the classroom, both in person and online at a distance. And finally, we'll end with a Q&A session about implementing SEL in your classroom. So let's begin by just defining what social and emotional learning is. The guidance report begins by defining SEL as the process through which children learn to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve goals, show and feel empathy for one another, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. SEL skills are broken into 5 core competencies, and you can see them in this diagram here titled The Core Skills at the Heart of SEL. We're going to look at each of these core competencies in detail and define them and look at some strategies to support each of them today over the next half hour. But what I wanted to point out is that these skills aren't going to be taught in a vacuum, obviously. First of all, they're taught within our classroom, within its curriculum, our instructional practices, also the classroom dynamics between teacher and child or between peers. And that takes place within a larger school environment where behavior policies and anti-bullying policies and whole school ethos are at play. And then all of this sits within the larger family and community partnerships and the types of issues that are happening in our communities. If a child's coming from a family or community that's marginalized or disadvantaged, it's going to impact the development of their social emotional skills, obviously. So on average, we know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds have weaker SEL skills. It's associated with poor mental health and academic attainment. When we began our journey with SEL at Billsley, we began by focusing on mental health, trauma, and adverse childhood experiences. And we did quite a lot of training for staff around this. We also ensured that along the way, we were looking at ways we could support our staff's well-being and mental health. We learned that children who've experienced trauma are twice as likely to develop depression and 3 times more likely to develop an anxiety disorder. We know that people who have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are 14 times more likely to attempt suicide, 3 times more likely to develop lung disease. We also know there are increases in drug use and liver disease, and just a range of long-term impacts on mental health and well-being. In our training, we also thought a lot about the protective factors for mental health and what our role can be in mitigating trauma and buffering positive outcomes. So we looked at things like good communication, belief in control, positive attitudes, the ability to reflect a sense of belonging and connectedness, and ability for children to raise problems. Those are all protective factors for mental health, and they're also all key skills that can be addressed through an SEL curriculum. So this is noted in the EEF guidance. They list a range of positive outcomes around mental health and well-being. We know that SEL leads to reduced emotional distress in children, including anxiety, depression, stress, and withdrawal, and also greater life satisfaction, well-being, and overall good health into adulthood. So the positive outcomes aren't only for a child, but for themselves later in life as well. A second positive outcome is around improved behavior. We know that there's improved attitudes and peer relationships when we introduce SEL, as well as reduced bullying and conduct problems. Importantly, there's also improved academic achievement. The guidance points out that in evidence reviews from more than 700 studies, it shows that on average, SEL has a positive impact on academic attainment equivalent to 4 additional months' progress. So it's a significant amount of academic achievement improvement. The last positive outcome is with teachers and the school environment. Teaching SEL leads to a more positive classroom environment, but also lower stress levels for teachers, higher job satisfaction, and better relationships with their students. And I think that especially right now, as I'm seeing the way teachers are integrating SEL into their online provision since we've been out of school, I can tell it's become really important to them personally. And I believe that's because they've seen the positive impacts on themselves as well as on the children who they work with. And so really, putting SEL into our programming is a win-win for everyone. Obviously, with COVID-19 and the current lockdown, the news is full of headlines about children's mental health. I screen grabbed some last week as I was making these slides, but we're looking at an increase in anxiety among our young people. We know that vulnerable children will be more at risk of these mental health issues, that Childline is being overrun with more calls than ever, that children who live in tower blocks are going to find this more devastating to their mental health. And the UN is warning of a surge in mental illness. And so we know that this is really important to the well-being of our children and their mental health. The guidance looks at some barriers to SEL, and these include time and pressure to focus on other priorities. I think that right now, SEL is coming to the forefront, and I think that's why so many of you are here today, and I think that's really fantastic, but it's something to keep in mind as we move forward and more pressures coming to focus on other things. If you're just joining us, make sure that you turn off your microphone. You can do that by scrolling down to the bottom of your screen, or else I hear myself talking through your computer. It's all very confusing. Thank you. So those are the key barriers for teaching SEL that the guidance talks about. And in terms of helping SEL delivery, schools were calling for training, for resources that don't require lots of time, as well as resources that link to the core curriculum. And I think that you'll see how we've done that at Billsley today, in that what we've done has not taken a lot of training. Our resources are simple and they link nicely with what we're already doing. So what we're going to do is just look at the summary of recommendations from the EEF. In implementing SEL at Billsley, we really carefully considered the recommendations given in the guidance report. Another important EEF document that we've consulted is titled Putting Evidence to Work, a School's Guide to Implementation, to ensure that we had the right foundations for a good implementation and successful outcomes. Some further documents that can really support you in planning for SEL can be found on the EEF website. One of them is an audit and discussion tool for SEL in your school. I'm finding this useful even now as we're coming back to thinking about lockdown and looking at what we've already done and looking at areas where we could improve. And there's also a planning approaches for SEL in primary schools sheet that you can find on the website. So in the guidance report, there are 6 recommendations that come under 4 different headings, and we'll look at all 6 of them now, but we'll be focusing on the first one in detail today. So the first set are around teaching strategies. Recommendation 1 is to teach SEL skills explicitly. And the second recommendation is to integrate and model SEL skills through everyday teaching. The next set of recommendations come under the heading of curriculum, and there's advice there around planning carefully for adopting a program if you choose to adopt curricula from outside, and that you need to use a SAFE curriculum, which stands for sequential, active, focused, and explicit. You want to make sure that whatever you adopt follows that guidance. The fifth recommendation is around the whole school. We want to make sure that whatever we're teaching in our classes are reinforced through whole school ethos and activities. And the sixth recommendation is around implementation, just making sure that you plan, support, and monitor your SEL implementation. So what we're going to do is take a look at each of the recommendations in the first section, and I'm going to show you some examples of what we've done in our school. So the first recommendation is to teach SEL skills explicitly, to use a range of strategies to teach skills both in dedicated time and in everyday teaching. And the strategies are shared that support each of these core competencies in SEL. There are simple routines and activities that you can use to develop particular SEL skills. They're evidence-based and they can be used flexibly. So many of the strategies here will be really familiar to teachers, but the key is just to teach these explicitly, purposefully, and frequently. The research shows that if we support teachers to use a range of strategies in an efficient way, they can really improve SEL provision in your school. There is a disclaimer, and that there is growing research to promote these strategies, and they're all derived from evidence-based practices, but they haven't been evaluated as standalone strategies. So as a school, you really need to judge whether these approaches are going to be effective for your context and for the children and families that you're supporting. The guidance report does suggest that there are many benefits for using a ready-made SEL curriculum, but it can be expensive, time-consuming, and a little bit inflexible. So an alternative approach is called evidence-based prevention kernels, and this may be more effective for some schools. This picture here has come from an article called Kernels of Practice for SEL, Low Cost, Low Burden Strategies, and that's from the Harvard Graduate School. And I found it really useful to consider. They discuss evidence-based prevention kernels, which are low cost and targeted strategies. They can be taught quickly across contexts. They don't require a lot of training for teachers to learn how to use them, or parents, or people in a range of settings. For that reason, they're very adaptable to individual cultural and contextual contexts. The study looked at 436 different strategies that are used in evidence-based SEL programs, and they narrowed it down to 5 key kernels. And those are around deep breathing, yoga and exercise, positive self-talk, procedures, and toolboxes. So at Billsley, we've designed the SEL Toolbox, which is a digital resource. It's a set of Google Slides that have been shared with all of our staff, and they include resources that they can easily copy and paste into any lesson or print out to be used in the classroom or online for that matter. And staff have had exposure to these resources through part of our larger trainings around mental health and trauma-informed practices and safe spaces and these kinds of things. So the staff are really aware of why we would use these tools and when we would use them and what we would expect the outcomes to be. And they know to come back and revisit if they're not finding the expected outcomes. These approaches just really aren't an add-on, but they're a part of a mindset that we've developed. And that's why I think it's working particularly well for us. So the first core competency is around teaching SEL skills explicitly. And the first skill is self-awareness. So that's around expanding children's emotional vocabulary and supporting them to express emotions. So self-awareness includes recognizing emotions and thoughts, understanding that feelings influence behavior, and knowing strengths and having a self-belief, and it leads to reduced social difficulties, including aggression. A tool that we've used to teach self-awareness is a feelings chart. You can see on the bottom left-hand side, it says the zones of regulation, and we've taken this from a program called the Zones of Regulation, and it uses practices based on evidence. We've used this across the whole school to develop basic knowledge of emotions, and we've also used it in some more targeted interventions with particular children. We've taught these lessons in dedicated time, and we've used it across the school day. And we just used consistent visuals and language across our school. So you can see how we've differentiated it here. What we use in the early years is at the top of the screen, and what we're using in Key Stage 1 is at the bottom of the screen. And this really lends itself to some of the recommendations, which are around using storybooks. So we use a lot of storybooks to talk about emotions, and then we pair it with the chart so that children can look and think about what emotion is that character showing. We use a lot of games like emotions charades. It might be the use of photos and videos. We have the children look in a mirror. They do miming so they can learn about facial expressions and body language. And then we also do a lot of different types of matching and sorting and grouping activities. And you can see here that the emotions are grouped into different zones that are color coded, but these are put together because these types of emotions tend to have the same types of physiological effects on the body. So when you're sad or tired or bored, your body tends to feel the same type of way in terms of your muscles and your breathing and your face. And another good example would be in the yellow zone. Feeling excited can have that same feeling in the stomach, what kids call the wiggly tummy or butterflies in their tummy, but so can worried. And so we teach the children that these emotions can come together in these zones. And you'll see the importance of this in a few minutes. Here's a further differentiation of the feelings chart. This is something we use in Key Stage 2. It's a mood meter. It comes from the ruler approach out of Yale. Again, you can see there's color coding, but there's just a lot more options in terms of emotional language. And this is a little more sophisticated in that the chart has a range of pleasantness as well as energy levels. And so the children really start to think about feeling and the body at the same time. So you can see here with these charts that these key concepts are revisited, and we use them progressively in different age group contexts. And this type of spiral curriculum is common to evidence-based SEL programs. You can read more about that in recommendation 4 about using a safe curriculum. When we're using these feeling charts, we're teaching the children to use I messages. I feel this way because. We provide a lot of supportive prompts, and having the children learn about their face and body cues goes well with this because we can say, oh, I see you've got your head down, and your body language is telling me that you're in the blue zone. And then we can help the children to pick a word that might fit their emotion that way. We make clear that all feelings are okay, but not all behaviors are. We do regular check-ins. Our teachers are really great about checking in with the children every morning as they come in the door, and then at different times throughout the day, whether it's coming in from play or after lunch, but those kind of transition times are key times where we check in with our children. And we use this a lot with modeling. I knew that this was taking off in school when I was walking down the corridor and I heard 3 different instances of people talking about the zones. In one of them, it was a child telling the teacher that, he was in the yellow zone because it was his birthday coming up. And then I walked a little further and I heard one of our year 5 teachers saying, oh, the interactive whiteboard isn't working. And I'm starting to get a little worried because, and describing how he was feeling and what he was going to do. He was just going to stop for a minute and have a drink because he solved this problem before. And that kind of modeling for the children to see that, we have those feelings too, and that we can work through them successfully is really important for our kids. And so from that, I know that it's really taken hold in school because we just have that modeling, not only when we planned for it, but when we haven't. You can see here that since we've moved online to Google Classroom, in year 3, Ms. O'Donnell, the teacher, just posted the feelings chart and said, we've been working on this at school. Why don't you tell us how you're feeling? And there was a range of emotions from, sometimes I'm bored, but I'm excited. My birthday is coming. From children identifying things like, well, I live in a garden, in a flat with no garden. I can't go outside. It gets really boring. And then you can see people start to chime in with their recommendations of how to solve that. Maybe you could do some reading, turn on some music and have a dance. And they're just going back to strategies that the children have learned in class of ways to manage their emotions. And so it's just been really nice to see the way that this has continued, even when we're teaching at a distance. I'm going to play a video for you from one of our year 2 teachers, Miss Triance. She's an NQT, and she's going to talk about how she's been doing further lessons online. Hopefully this will work as I play.
Hi, my name is Miss Triance and I work in year 2. My first online SEL lesson focuses on the core skill of self-awareness, particularly encouraging children to be aware of their own emotions and identifying these. I wanted this lesson to help children start thinking about the way they feel, hopefully prompting discussion of feelings with parents at home, but also providing children with an appropriate platform through which they can talk to us teachers about how they're feeling. It's definitely given me a better insight into the way that some children are feeling at home. So I introduced the lesson by explaining to the children why it's important to think about our emotions, and then used a clip from the film Inside Out, which is a great, exciting visual representation of emotions, which I hoped would engage the children too. After that, I used the zones board to remind children of some of the emotions. This is a tool that we consistently use in year 2, so the children are familiar with the tool, and I think this makes them much more confident in identifying their emotions and which zone they may be in because they've already used this tool before. I didn't want the task in this lesson to be too overwhelming, so I simply asked the children to show day by day which emotion they were experiencing. And we've also used the comments section of Google Classroom to engage further with the children and encourage them to talk about how they feel. In addition to this, it gives the opportunity for the children to talk or share how they feel if they need to, without prompting from us. A final point would be the use of widgets and visual symbols, which I think has really helped all the children, and particularly EAL students, to access the SEL curriculum more easily and identify how they're feeling.
Great. I hope you all could hear that. I think for me, it was just really nice to see how SEL has become really key to what our teachers do, even our newest teachers. And she's so confident that her children have an understanding of this already because they've been working on it at home. And to have it happening online now is just really important. So we'll move on to the next piece of recommendation, which is around self-regulation. And this is teaching children to use self-calming strategies and positive self-talk to help deal with intense emotions. So self-regulation deals with managing your own emotions, being able to calm down and focus and control your impulses. It leads to more socially acceptable behavior, as well as self-regulated learning. And this ties in nicely with the EEF Metacognition Guidance Report, and we'll see a nice example of it in the next video that I share with you. So the EEF recommends that children be taught to recognize body cues, and we've done this with what we called a zones diary. The children learn about the different physiological effects of their emotions while considering when they might feel this way and how it might make others feel. So you can see in this example here that we've taken lots of pictures of the children, and this child has identified that he's in the blue zone, feeling sad and bored when he has to wait or when his work feels too hard. And he understands that it might make other people feel sad. And he came to this conclusion after he drew on his body here of his body clues of being in the blue zone. And he wrote a groan, that's the beside his body. And we were able to have a chat about, well, how do you think I feel when I've asked you to wait and then you start making that sound? And he was like, oh, you start to feel sad. So it helps the children just make a lot of connections to themselves and to others, which I think are really important skills to have. The second step we take in this is each child develops a strategy toolbox. So they brainstorm ways together that they handle their strong emotions. We look at techniques that they'll choose to use for each zone. So if they're feeling sad or tired, will the strategies they choose to use be different than if they're excited or worried or angry? So they think about ways that they could deal with those emotions. And they're aware of these because we teach them self-calming techniques. We practice them throughout the day when the children are calm and ready to learn. And then they're able to really consider what does help them best. So this child has said that having a drink and listening to music really helps him to feel better if he's not feeling well. The digital toolbox that we provide with our staff includes a range of visuals and videos that support practice of these strategies. So staff can include them during their lessons, during transition times, whenever they feel it might be best for the children just to stop and take a break. So you can see an example there at the bottom of a 5-finger breathing technique. We teach this to the children because they can do it at any time. We also have a visual for a progressive muscle relaxation routine, so the children all know how to do that and when they could do it. Another important thing to teach is positive self-talk. We at Billsley thought it was important that our physical environment also supported our children's SEL skills. And so we created safe spaces in our school. This is an example of one where children can come and have a break and talk to someone if they need to. There's normally a member of staff in that space at certain times, and the children know they can go there during lessons or lunch times and that kind of thing. And one thing that we have in that room, along with our feelings charts and visuals and resources to support self-calming, and that are also some positive self-affirmations. And these are really easy to have on a teacher's desk or for a teacher to put onto children's desk to help them think about some positive things about themselves. Those are good for all of us, I think, too. Here's an example of something that's happened online in year 4. Another one of our NQTs emailed me to say, oh, I took some things from the toolbox. I reshared the toolbox at the beginning of lockdown, and she popped a few of the strategies into her Google Classroom, and these were the children's responses. They were identifying themselves as feeling relaxed and that it changes your mind and is amazing. And I think you can see that children just react really positively when they're given the opportunity to practice their self-calming techniques. We've also begun some weekly well-being initiatives across our school where the children are having some weekly well-being activities. This is an example of a self-care plan. So the children had to consider what activities make them feel calm or happy, but we changed it so it was more related to home, and then who are the people that they could trust to help them if they need it. But the important thing was for them to think about times during their day at home that maybe aren't going so well, where they might feel upset. So this child identified that being told no, arguing with his siblings, and bedtime were all times of the day when he tended to get a little bit more upset. But now he's written a list of strategies that he can use to help himself regulate in those times. So maybe it's snuggling up in a blanket and getting his teddy bear. At bedtime might help him to feel calm during that transition. We also ensure that we're constantly putting childline and young minds at the front of what we're doing in those activities, just in case children need another place to turn to. Year 3 have been exploring ways they can prompt children to self-regulate as they begin their learning online and to reflect on any strategies they've used. This also relates to the EEF guidance on metacognition and the importance of children to identify if they're focused before they begin a task. It also follows the home learning framework that you can find on the EEF website, and I've just put a screen grab there down the side of the approach to take. So during the activation phase, year 3 are prompting the children to think of what they already know about self-regulation and tools they can use if they need them. And at the end, the children reflect on and review any strategies they use to enhance their engagement. So Sarah O'Donnell, our year 3 lead, is going to share that with you in this video.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm Sarah, and I'm currently Year 3 leader at Bilsley. Before school closed, we were developing the use of social and emotional learning tools in Year 3, and we had pretty much embedded the use of zones of regulation language. Children could identify where they were at in terms of the zones, and as a staff in Year 3, we were using shared language, such as the examples that you can see on the slide, to model us talking about our emotions and feelings and what zone that we're in and why. And we were moving forward as a year group to look at how could we get ourselves back into the green zone if we're not there at the moment, what strategies work for us. And that was something that we were developing prior to school closing. So when we moved to the virtual classroom, we wanted to enable the use of SEL to be just as prominent and important in the online lessons. So I'm going to talk you through a few things that we've done whilst using Google Classroom. So something that we're really thinking about now is a reminder of strategies of positive learning at the start of each lesson that we provide online. So we have slides that look like this, where we mention the green zone, positive behaviour strategies and tools for a good lesson. And in our stream in the morning, we put a breathing exercise video on so that the children can access that in order to become ready for learning. And then something that we've really been working on over summer term, particularly the last couple of weeks, have been lesson reflections. Primarily these have been at the end of lessons, but we have started to experiment with midway reflections, such as this one, that I think somebody else at Bilsley actually created. So this is a really useful slide to put after a video or a piece of text that the children have had to read, where they have to think, well, do I understand that? Yes, I can move on. Or if not, what can I do in terms of understanding what I've just watched or read? Shall I watch it again? Shall I ask for help, etc.? So these are the end of lesson reflections that we've created. And as a year group, we've created a few different ones, and we're just kind of experimenting to see which ones work the best. We have a self-assessment tool. We then have something related to SEL. So, for example, this slide here, we've got the zones of regulation on, and the children type in which zone they're in and why. And a lot of the time, when they're typing in their answer to which zone they're in, it's not necessarily about the lesson. It might be something else that's going on for them at that time at home. That's really important in terms of relationships. So we have that conversation when we're feeding back to them about their work. Okay, why were you feeling that way? Why were you in the blue zone? And they'll tell you, why that was. And we also have a chance for them to say what they did or what they could have done to help them if they were stuck with their learning. So here, the child could drag a tick down to the strategy that works best for them. So in this case, the child said, I would have a brain break and try again. And that's just another example of the same reflection slide. This particular child said that they'd lost control. So when we asked them why that was, if I remember rightly, it was something to do with a question that they got stuck on, but they had read it again and they'd managed to get it correct. So I thought that was really positive in terms of them self-regulating. Here's another example. How did you get on today? And they have to answer the 4 questions, just simple yes or no answers, and then let us know how much help they had today with their learning. And then here's a similar slide with a different question at the top. Reflect, how much effort did you put in? I think that might change the way the children think about their reflection at that point. Okay, how hard did I work today? And they could drag the tick to which statement reflects how they felt, and what strategies could you use if you get stuck next time. And this child said, look back at the work I've already completed. We've also started to introduce his own suggestion box, but it's very early days with that. I don't think I've seen anyone typing that as yet, but that would be the next step. And there's another one. So again, we've got the zones of regulation, and we've got chance for the children to finish the sentences about where they're at in terms of their feelings. And here's some pupil voice. So most of the children have said that they find the reflections helpful, and some of the comments are just here. A lot of them are centred around because they get to express their feelings, or they're being asked how they feel. That's important to them. They can share how they feel. And then this is a question we asked them about the zones of regulation, and 100% of the children that answered so far have said that they find it really helpful because it helps them to understand their feelings.
Okay, big thank you to Sarah. I think that you can really see the work that Year 3 is doing in trying to integrate SEL into what they're doing online. And you can see from those children's responses how much they value just being asked how they feel. And that opportunity to express their feelings is big for them. And I think that's in large part because it continues to develop that relationship that they have with the teacher that they trust so much, and that so important to them, even when they're distanced from them. So we'll move on to another recommendation, which is around social awareness, using stories to discuss others' emotions and perspectives. So self-awareness is the ability to understand the perspective of others and to empathize with them. It leads to positive development and mental health of children, but also satisfaction, well-being, labor market success, and good overall health in adulthood. So a really key skill for our children to learn. In our toolbox, we have a page pointing with example questions that teachers can pull from. Something we were already doing was using high quality literature or poetry or different films and interesting stimulus for the children to respond to. But this tool just makes the SEL skills really explicit and ensures that SEL isn't being added on, but it's being embedded in what we're already doing. So these questions, things like how can you tell how the character is feeling? What about their body language and facial expressions? It's bringing back to those zones lessons that we've done, and teachers are able to have those feelings charts up to refer back to when they're talking about what a character has said or done. And then it also brings them into some self-reflection. How did the characters, how would you solve this problem? Or can you explain a time when you felt the same way? Or what could we do differently if this happened with us? And those are really important skills for our children to develop. An example of this is some self-reflective questioning in Year 1. The children read the story in my heart, and then they responded to talk about their own emotions while they've been at home. So there was some, dragging widgets to show their feelings while they've been at home, but then also identifying what makes them feel happy, what makes them feel sad. And you can see that this child in Year 1 was able to identify things that are currently making him happy and sad, and what he can do to help keep himself feeling calm. And he talked about how he feels happy when he plays water guns, and he feels sad that he can't see his nan and his granddad right now. But when he's sad, he can make himself feel calm by playing water guns with his sister, which I think is the most excellent example from Year 1. And we're seeing, this evidence right across school, and the ability our children have to identify both positive and negative emotions, but also to know how to deal with them, even at a very young age. And a further recommendation concerns relationship skills. The guidance suggests role-playing good communication and listening skills, so that children have positive interactions with each other. It leads them to be able to navigate social situations effectively. And a way that we do this at Billesley is through using P4C. P4C requires children to model good communication, eye contact. They don't interrupt one another. They use phrases like I agree or I disagree. And they may discuss topics like relationship building and accepting difference. It's evidence-based. It leads to respect and behavior, listening and communication skills, and greater self-esteem. Our year 6 teacher, Claire, is going to talk about how she's used this in year 6. I'm going to show you her first example, which is around using P4C in the classroom, because she really explains what it is in case you're not familiar with it. And then I'll explain to you some of the examples from online that they've had.
So PPC at Billesley is incorporated into a lot of our teaching, but we also teach it as a standalone subject where we teach children social skills, the ability to express their own opinions, to listen and respect others' opinions, and also to disagree respectfully with one another. I'm just going to take you through a set of slides that I would use in a typical PPC lesson and just give you a bit of detail. So the first thing we do is mix the children up. We play a game to mix them up so they're not always talking to the same children, not always mixing with their friends. They then will recap the rules in P4C. These are simple social rules, a lot of them. You look at the person that's speaking, you show respect by listening, by not fiddling or talking to somebody else. You are focused on what somebody's saying and you respond to what they're saying. So you agree or disagree, or you build on something, or you pick up a point from somebody. You don't just state your opinion and not listen to anything else because that's your opinion and it can't move. We also emphasize that children are not allowed to say anything that they know is going to offend somebody. But they are allowed to ask questions if they don't understand why somebody might be upset by something, to try and give them more information about the way that society works and the world around them, and how you need to work together even when you don't necessarily agree. Then we do a warm-up game like this, just something really low stakes so the children can express their opinions. Often this is where we find a lot of the less confident children will express opinions because it doesn't matter, but they are saying what they think and they're justifying it. They're not just agreeing with somebody or nodding along. Then we will watch a stimulus. This one is about a girl who is obsessed with getting follows on a social media website and ends up really annoying her cat, completely trashing her house, knocking her front teeth out, but getting a selfie with the cat that gets loads and loads of likes, so she's still happy about it. When we've watched the video, which we usually do a couple of times, we then talk about big ideas, which are the sort of underlying things that that video makes you think about. So it might be ideas to do with social media. It might be the importance that you put on your digital presence compared to your real presence. It might be animal cruelty. There's a lot of different things that children have come up with. Once you've got those big ideas, we formulate P4C questions. The questions are about the big ideas rather than about the stimulus, to try and make the conversations that we have more relevant to everybody rather than just about a video or a picture that we've got up on a screen. They work in threes. They come up with questions together. I give them question stems like these just to help them to put a question into a P4C way, make it something that you want to discuss. These are usually displayed on my working wall as well. And then when they come up with their questions, one question per group, they go around, and then as a class we vote on which question. And there's a variety of ways that we do, but the general rule is whichever one wins, that's the one we're doing. No fuss. We're going to talk about this one. I quite often give children more than one vote just so that they don't feel like they have to vote for just for their friends or their own. They can vote for anyone. And once we've done that, we have a discussion about the question. And the children respond to each other. They build on each other's ideas until eventually you come to a conclusion.
So thank you to Claire for explaining us what philosophy for children involves. It's a real core at the core of what we do at Billsley. We use it in a lot of our lessons. And so it's an opportunity for the children to develop those skills throughout the day. And Year 6 has been adapting this work online as well. They're doing a little bit differently and posting a P4C type question. It might be, what is a hero? And then the children are responding. Claire was telling me that at first they found the responses, the children weren't necessarily referring to each other, and they found the responses to be quite short. But as they've continued to model and prompt the children to use their P4C skills, they're finding now the children are referring to one another, referencing each other's points, asking new questions as they go. And I know that she's really concerned about making P4C at the heart of what they're doing as school opens up for Year 6 children to return. Another recommendation is around responsible decision making, and that's to teach and practice problem-solving problems. We want our children to be able to make constructive choices and evaluate and identify solutions and consequences. It leads to more constructive play in children, better relationship with their peers, and children are reported to be more cooperative at home and at school when they have better responsible decision-making skills. Some tools that we have in our SEL toolbox are the size of a problem chart, which we use a lot with our children to help them decide how big a problem is. And it also helps them to think about what their reaction should be, how big their reaction should be to a problem. We use the restorative questions often when we're facing problems with children. And we also have this, what's called POPS, problem solving strategy. And it's just provides a guidance for teachers to work through when they're discussing a problem that's occurred with a child. We teach these not during crisis moments, but when the children are calm and relaxed, so that they're already familiar with this when there has been a problem and they're upset, or we might need to take some time before we come back to talk about the problem when the child is calm. And the children are also encouraged to resolve problems caused by behavior together through discussion. So you can see in this problem-solving strategy here, it's based on guidance in the EEF around helping children to identify their problems, think about what options they had when that problem happened, what could they have done differently, what were the pros and cons of those choices, and then to pick what they would do next time and try that again in the next situation to see if it's helpful. We've also included this online. We've changed the look of it a bit because we want to ensure ultimately the safety of our children when they're away from us. And so every class has assigned this online in terms of being able to define how big a problem is. So there was a lesson around it and some sorting skills and rating skills. And in the end, it leads them to realize that small problems they can solve themselves, that medium-sized problems they could talk to someone at home about, or if it's a problem with their work, say they could message their teacher on Google Classroom. And we've been sure to differentiate what our safeguarding concerns would be. And that with those, perhaps they need to call school to talk to someone or call Childline, and in the state of an emergency to call 999. We hope that because we've been preparing our children with these skills, that during this time, their safety will be improved as well as their social emotional learning. Before we discuss any questions, I'll just point out that we do have a training event coming up in the autumn. So this is unpicking social and emotional learning, including behavior and metacognition. And that's going to run through the autumn. And we also have making the best use of TAs, including SEND, and that is also running through next year. So I'll just take a look at our questions. We'll definitely be able to share these with our further training in the autumn. If there's anything I've missed, you just want to pop it into the chat stream in case you've asked a question and I've missed it. I believe the training sessions will be for 3 days because we're going to look at the way that SEL skills behavior align with one another. And we can be sure to share our resources with you, yes. All right, well, if you have any other questions, you can be sure to contact us. And we'll be sure to share the resources with you. This has been recorded, so it can be shared as well with people who were unable to attend. And I just want to thank you for sharing your morning with me. I hope that you found it really useful, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you at further events in the future. Thanks.